podcast, a live stream, and I spend a lot of time thinking about product. I spend a lot of time thinking about systems, and then in my spare time, I float down rivers and play D&D.
Hey everybody, thanks for coming on out. I'm Evan and co-founded Knapsack along with Chris here. I'm kind of the boots on the ground, kind of front lines person. I got all my start, in like the front end developer world, basically, taking comps and turning them into sites so people could experience them, and just excited to be able to like try to help out that process of getting like all these great ideas out to users to experience them. Thanks for making it today.
So we're going to talk about five kind of big things, four things in Q&A. We're going to talk about some of the brief history of AI. It has a fairly brief history, so it's pretty quick. What do we want to do with the AI? Some of the stuff in dreamland versus the stuff in reality. Practical and impractical uses for AI and design systems, and how this all changes the way we work. But to kind of kick things off, I'd like to start with a poll that we'll throw up in the polls tab. And that is about how many of you have a design. And so you can click the little go vote button there. We'll just keep this up for a minute, get some live results here. Nice. So lots of folks just getting started. A few people that have been on the train for a while. Awesome to see. We'll revisit this at the end, just trying to get a sense of how many folks are using design systems right now. So thinking about where we all were November 30th of last year. This is the great, like most momentous day in history. And you're going to see a lot of XKCD cartoons throughout this presentation because Randall Monroe is a spirit animal to me. So ChatGPT GPT-3 was released to the public on November 30th last year. And there were a lot of questions that came from this. A lot of things about, a typically normal human response, which is, should I be scared of this, or is this awesome, or some interesting measure of both? I actually was a little behind the curve on this. I'd worked in AI for a while at this point and understood a lot about machine learning. And so to me, this was kind of like just another day until it wasn't, because what happened is a friend of mine, Adam, is the first person that told me about GPT-3. And he did it by sending me a D&D portrait. And so Adam, we play a ton of D&D together. It's a regular Monday game. He's an electrician. He is a really smart person, but he knows very little about the internet and technology relative to people that work in it every single day. And that was what he texted me. He's like, I put my face in this cool AI tool, and I generated a really awesome character portrait for our next gaming session. And so this was the AI revolution as it was presented to me. But it was really interesting. And the interesting thing about this was that my friend that wasn't in tech all of a sudden was talking nonstop about the use of AI. And that was really cool and super powerful. So all of this is about the idea of the potential of AI, right? There's a lot of things right now that are out there that are showcasing some potential ideas of where this all could go. And a lot of people are putting these things out there as AI fact, when a lot of it is AI gimmick right now. It's really cool to see things on TikTok or Twitter that basically show people creating entire websites or entire things based on generative AI. But there's a lot of questions that still need to be asked about how practical those things are to work in production at major enterprises all across the world. And so we're likely at this point in AI right now that is this height of inflated expectations where literally AI can do anything. It can walk your dog. It can clean your house. But then there's the practical idea of like, it probably only feeds the dog on Tuesdays, and it probably cleans your house by putting all of the glasses in the bottom cabinets. So jumping onto that, Evan's going to talk a little bit about like the system structure here.
First I want to toss up a poll around basically design token usage. So at the heart of pretty much all design systems is design tokens, all these little design decisions that have been made. And so I'm just curious, how many do you all have in here? So these are saved, brand colors, spacing, scale, and so many things. So would be kind of curious on basically how many y'all have out there. And this, like the other polls, we're going to come back around to take a look at some of the results from them. So kind of excited to be able to see here. So seems like, I like the constrained choices here. That's a nice start. Okay, let's go back on over to the slide and we'll come take a look at the poll when we get done. So design systems love constraints. What we want to be able to do is take the possible choices of like our colors from like 65 million down to like a couple dozen. We want to make sure that instead of having like every available like spacing from 100, we're down to 8 or 9 different kind of pieces. And so that really helps things out. So the components also in a design system help constrain the choices. And so instead of having every possible HTML element, got these different building blocks in the components. Likewise, all the components with their variations and their props, they also constrain things down. You get to a point where you're saying, hey, the button size is large or medium, as opposed to putting an arbitrary size towards it. Same thing with, is the button primary or secondary? That constrains basically the color choices there to it. And so what limiting choice does is it creates consistency. Consistency creates harmony. And this leads to predictability and trust for the users, and then efficiency for the whole team. So these streamlined decision making really helps out. And so with those constraints, that leads to that consistency. And so this is the first point that I want to be able to make, is that design systems love constraints. So AI also does. And so there is a classic garbage in, garbage out problem with AI. It is, vulnerable to that. It basically needs to know context about what it should be focused on. Being able to just have general knowledge about everything and being good at it doesn't work too well, especially when it comes to your design system. And so the constraints that AI thrives on is a lot of structured data. And if it knows more about, if you limit what its purview is, you're going to end up having a better quality output there. And so if you have, its options for everything under the sun, you're going to have a really bad signal to noise ratio. And, not just even as a designer, but as the people who are implementing the design. So the end users, and what I mean by the end users in this statement here is like the developers who are implementing the product before the users end up experiencing it. They might have a contrast issue and then just pick one of 8.5 million things that are darker than the colored. And that's those little things that happen that leads to basically designs getting like, way off than how they were originally envisioned. So, being able to have the choices constrained really, really helps out. It is, really good for basically making sure that what you had planned is getting out to the end users. So what we want to be able to do here is have professionally crafted components and patterns that are decided, so that way the things that we feed into AI ends up being really high quality output. And so with the constrained choices that design systems thrive on and AI thrives on, the two make a very natural pair.
people say design, 23% of people say code. It's holding roughly steady as people answer that poll. So,
hey, Chris, just so you know, no one could hear you until just about a couple seconds ago after I was talking. So just heads up.
gotcha. So we have this poll that's out there right now that is, what is the source of truth for your digital products? About 77% of people say it's design. About 24% of people say it's code. And so in that case, this is a little bit of a trick question. The idea of like, what is the source of truth for your digital products? It's really about what your users see. And a lot of the sort of sentiment that has happened for a long time is that there's this ownership of truth that exists in design. But the reality is that what gets shown to users is not Figma files, or XD files, or whatever design tool it is that you're using. What's actually shown to users is a website or a native app, and that's really what the thing is that matters. And that's oftentimes a little bit more reflective of code. And one of the wonderful things that Figma's done recently is it's gotten a lot of people in design thinking about systems and constraints in a very similar way to the way that folks in code think about it. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to bridge this gap that's sort of illustrated by this wonderful drawing that I use in lots and lots of presentations, where you think about this thing that is really, really beautiful that is being designed. And then you actually think about what that looks like in your actual build. And this is a criticism of a lot of folks in the digital industry, is that really beautiful thing that I made in Figma or whatever other design tool I'm using doesn't look anything like my actual production application. And so there's a lot of ideas about like, hey, can AI actually help with this? And the answer is maybe, probably. So when you think about AI use in design systems, you have a lot of from tos, and I'm not going to read all these because hopefully if you're attending this, you can read. But there's this idea of how do we take a bunch of experiences that were very bespoke and very obscure and arcane, and then start to make it more systematized, more focused in structured data, more defined in such a way that it can be used not just by design, not just by engineering, but by both parties at once. And the intent here is to really democratize this creative process using AI, so that if you're a designer, you don't feel like your work stops at Figma. You can have an impact on what the actual production thing looks like, because there's a lot of design decisions that happen outside of our design tools, like page load order, or lots of things with states, or the way that accessibility is implemented. All those things happen downstream of design. And likewise, as engineers, you don't have to be constrained by the idea of like, oh, this thing isn't designed yet. If you have a set of building blocks inside of a system that are well structured, there's a lot of things that you can do that allow you to sort of democratize that creative ability. And that is intentionally well structured for use in artificial intelligence. And so there's kind of this idea of this battle that is going on. There's the idea of like, should we take AI and use AI to generate a bunch of code from what comes out of our design tools? Should I be able to take that Figma file and make it into React? And then there's this other side of the fence, which is, should we make code just more accessible to design? So that instead of having to use a design tool at all, we can just use and manipulate code building blocks via the promise that we've always had in design systems of it's all Legos and we can build anything we want with it. The reality is probably somewhere in between. There's a lot of advantages and disadvantages to both sorts of systems. But one of the things that is really powerful about designing with code is the idea is there's no longer a translation gap between what a user sees and what we're designing with. And that's a really, really powerful statement to basically say, now I'm designing something in the medium it's destined for. Instead of having to model with clay to build my car, I can actually go work in the factory and make anything I want. And that's a very, very powerful transition that I think is going to become more and more prevalent as AI gets bigger and better adoption. We think about this in a very particular way that Evan can explain, but this is also kind of the fundamental underpinning of how we think about the construction of a knapsack.
Yeah, so the way that Knapsack works is it lives in the repo and it stores its content in the repo and it has access to all of the things in the repo. So that's all of the code that ends up creating that final user experience that we've been talking about. But it opens up a UI for adjusting things in the repo. And so the idea here is basically trying to bring the different disciplines together in one area without having to learn like the specialty. So it's not about learning how to code, it's about getting a little bit closer to code. And so what Knapsack lets you do is compose using those expertly crafted components in the design system. And so we take a look at all of this structured and unstructured data, and that's the thing that AI really thrives on being able to work with. And being able to read that allows it also to suggest changes to it. Being able to look at your design tokens lets it spot which ones might be missing and its ability to create in there. So that is kind of a really high level quick overview of like how Knapsack works and how we think AI fits into that puzzle.
So one of the things that I think is an interesting part about AI in design systems is we oftentimes think about AI as this one canonical thing. Then that AI thing is out there, and it is the AI. Oftentimes that's ChatGPT or Midjourney or some other fairly well known AI application that's out there. But the reality is most use of AI inside of things like design systems, and I would say most practical use in general, is going to include multiple different kinds of AI interacting with one another. And so to make this simpler, we created 4 AI personas around this. There's the librarian, the assistant, the creator, and the manager. And by the way, all of these different images are generated using AI. And I thought that the results were really fun. But this showcases sort of our ideas on the different categories of AI that would be used inside of design systems. And so first is the librarian. If you think about the traditional implementations of AI that we see sort of all over the place, there's chatbots, prompts. These are people are all about like these AI tools are all about the ability to help us navigate and discover things inside of our system. And so this is going to help you understand more about how your design system is built. It's going to help if you're using it for the first time, you find the right things. You're going to say things like, "Hey, I want to know how I can add onto a button," and it should be able to point you to the prop that you can use inside of your design system. That is a little toggle that says use icon or don't use icon. So all of this gives you an idea of how to navigate, discover, and use things better and faster. There's another one, which is the assistant. This is a lot like a Copilot or even Clippy, where you think about the idea of how you can get suggestions during your workflow that improve the things that you're creating. And so this is the idea of hey, I have a button with 3 different sizes, small, medium, and large. What if I were to create an extra large or an extra large? And there's this idea of having something that's working sort of over your shoulder, looking at you, suggesting different ways that you could improve the system along the way. This is my favorite sort of thing with generative AI, another XKCD, but there's also a lot of things that happen inside of these generative tools that are difficult to predict, and they happen in unexpected ways. And so in the case of this cartoon, he's using autocomplete to find where the secret meeting is. The reality is there's lots of different things that are really hard about this technology because you end up with a lot of unintended consequences. And that assistant is one place where you can get really tripped up. For example, how do you limit access to that information? How do you structure your data in such a way that the right data is being used to autocomplete things instead of data that give you hallucinations or incorrect answers? And then there's the one everybody's very excited about, the creator. The ability to actually have something create content for you that you never really envisioned yourself. Oftentimes this requires some sort of external use of a system. So I want to understand like what a landing page is. Well, unless I've actually built a landing page inside of my design system, I have to go outside of the design system to understand what that means and then take that data back in and apply that to my design system. Now, that's totally plausible. There's all sorts of AI models that do this. And most of the time when you're a big enterprise that has things about like data privacy concerns and everything like that, you're grabbing a model and hosting it yourself that has a lot of that data already pre-built into it. And then you're using a creator model to actually generate things using your design system. And this is where structured data matters. You could basically say like, hey, I want to create a landing page. And if your structured data isn't well defined, it's going to build you this bespoke landing page. But if you have a prompt that is more like, I need to build a landing page and it needs to have a hero and it needs to have 3 cards and it needs to have a ribbon and it needs to have a header, a footer, and a nav, it's going to be able to recognize those components inside of your design system and then actually use those components themselves to construct the thing. And then there's the one that's like a little behind the scenes, the manager. The manager is all about measuring and validating the success of your choices. This is something that is really important to the future of design, in that a lot of times things like design ROI are really difficult to understand. So like, what design is better than any other design? There's a lot of this that is very anecdotal or observational. And what you can do with the manager is you can actually make some of that data driven. And so when we think about that, we think about this idea of how do I optimize a page for a user experience, which I'll dive into more here in just a second. But if you were to put these on an axis, you can kind of start to understand the use of structured data and how important that structured data is in relative to the complexity of the task.
So these different usages kind of boil down to being able to find something in a really big haystack, being able to improve existing things that you've already created, and then finally getting something from nothing. So these different use cases have different goals, and they kind of line up with some of the different personalities, if you will, that Chris just went through. Let's talk about a couple of them. So in this example here, we are looking for some suggestions. And so we already have colors and we've already started to create a bit of structure here. And you can notice if you look that there are some missing colors here. So for example, we are missing the light primary color. And being able to take a look at the difference in luminosity between these, and AI could be able to figure out what that next color would be. Think that once you already have a bit of a rhythm, literally like a rhythm of like how much the darkness changes, then it should be able to pick up the rest and keep on going. So another example would be taking a look at button variations or filling out the sticker sheet. And so being able to, say that, hey, we've got the small, medium, large button. We've got it in, whether it's got a drop down or not and disabled. And then you can obviously keep on going. I know everybody here has seen some, very huge sticker sheets that show every single possible variation. And we all know that sometimes it looks just fine with an icon and it looks just fine large. But when you make it large and with an icon, you can see that the vertical centering is off, for example. And so being able to make all of those permutations for you is another thing that AI would be really good at, because it sees the structure here and it can figure out what is the missing variation that has not been made yet.
So there's a really exciting future here when we think about those design decisions that I was talking about before and the ways that we measure them. We can actually base this a lot in data about actual user behavior. Excuse me. If we were to think about how you optimize an experience, and this is just like a quick sample page that's drawn up in Tailwind. If you have structured data and then you pair that with reinforcement learning, those manager AIs, and then you add a bunch of automation, you can do a lot of things that actually optimize experiences for users based on verifiable design decisions. So as designers, what you can do is you can say, these are the allowable sets of variations that exist inside of my designs. As engineers, you can implement those. And then what AI can do is it can use a combination of user feedback and reinforcement learning to actually optimize around those design decisions. So over, however many observable uses of this particular landing page, you could find out that if you simplified your navigation, you end up with fewer clicks to conversion. And so the AI could actually automatically make that decision for you to simplify that experience. Likewise, if you have differences in video versus imagery, which of those create a better user experience? And also a lot of data about for whom. This is just one example of how optimization can work, where you think about the idea of like, we can measure results in user land and use user behavior to inform our design thinking and our design decisions. There's also a feature that allows for a lot of personalization around these design decisions. So actually looking at runtime, the ability to change things about that experience on the fly based on what kind of user you are. I don't know if that's a like blocking personalization token that wanders around with you or anything like that. I think that it is, though, a very interesting take on the idea of how you can personalize and create better web accessibility for everybody. One last poll that we have. Can we throw up the poll about how frequently folks use AI? I'm really curious to see the number of bots in here. They're all just posting, follow me on LinkedIn comments. Man, anticipation's killing me. There we go. So lots of folks have tried it. There's only 26 bots in this session, so that's good. Unless you're a bot that's smart enough to know that you shouldn't pick the bot thing. And there's lots of folks that use it every single day. So I guess the point of this is that the AI revolution is here, and it's going to change the way that we work. With most people trying this, you can see that this is going to shift things.
I'd be curious about the people who do use AI. If in the chat you want to drop a couple examples of what you use and things that you have found helpful. Oh, I know it's all ChatGPT, but like, what is the goal? What did it help you with? I see a bunch of people being like GPT, and I'm like, yes, that's definitely the one.
Hey, there's a Bard or two in there too.
Oh, these are great. Plan a family trip. All that.
Lots of stuff with text.
Yep.
Lots of things with translation. That's a great idea. Copywriting, emails.
That's
great. I use it for email like every day.
Inspiration for illustration. Labeling for difficult to understand UI. Oh, thanks everybody for throwing this in. This is fascinating.
Yeah, this is super cool. Yeah, I mean, I think about a lot of people are talking about things that are usable with text. What we're going to start to see is these actually be usable with design. So let me actually talk about some of the ideas of how this changes work. It's going to erode a lot of the differences between design and code. This has already been starting to break down for years. Designers have to care a lot more about the way things are constructed in their designs so that they're actually able to be implemented in code. And likewise, engineers are making ever more design decisions. And so there's a lot of different things that are going to shift. And a lot of that is going to be about democratization. And as I mentioned before, democratization is all about the ability for anybody to pick up a system and be able to use it to create something. And that's going to be a floodgate, because what you're going to look at is you're going to look at this idea that not every single person has to be a specialist to be able to contribute meaningfully to the creation of product. And so that is going to open up a lot of room for ideas. It's going to open up a lot of room for creative processes that are outside of the normal ways of working right now. I think also, likewise, there's going to be a lot associated with standards and testing that happen here that is going to be a huge boon, especially in the areas of accessibility, there's going to be a lot more transparency in that creative process, because when we all rally around design patterns instead of bespoke designs, we think about how those patterns are going to be used over and over and over again across lots of different products and lots of different implementations. And when we think about those things, that means that we put a lot of those core concepts like performance and accessibility into those building blocks, those building block patterns themselves. And then also that transition of metrics that I was talking about, that's going to be a major shift, where design is still going to have a lot of ideas of like, let's base this in research, or let's base this in trends, or let's base this in like fundamentally what feels right, a lot of intuition. But we're going to be able to measure the effectiveness of that in user land and make small tweaks and adjustments that make it even better. And I think the thing that is a really big part of this too is that you're going to see a lot of this get automated. And this is the whole part where like fear enters back into the equation. Like, is design going to get automated away? I think that's very unlikely. It's like the saying, is engineering going to get automated away? What we're going to start to do is we're going to start to use these tools to make us faster and more effective. You still need humans to be able to say like, hey, this design is right or wrong, or hey, this code implementation is right or wrong. And ideally, the internet is still being consumed by humans. And so the ability to shift towards more high complexity skills is going to be how our jobs all change. So this rallies around two kind of fundamental questions. Fundamental question one, does it save me time or make what I'm creating significantly better? And so there's a hidden cost to every part of AI that is all about, how much time do you actually spend implementing or automating that thing with AI? And so how does that manual correction also factor into that? That's something that hasn't been a traditional part of the equation, is if you're able to sort of like put this AI generalist on board and have it automate a bunch of things for you, how much time as people do we need to spend correcting that AI's work? And then what is a line that is helpful versus distracting? And so how much value does that AI produce? And there's a lot of questions around this that sort of change a lot of our automation curves. So when you would think about automating processes like build processes for code, or some layout processes inside of design tools, it was usually measured in a very solid efficiency gain. We now have an extra variable in that equation about how much time and effort and brain space does it take for humans to correct or to enhance the things that AIs correct for or create for us. Ironically, this is something that gets said about design systems a lot themselves, where when people talk about the structure of design systems, they wonder like, hey, does it take me longer to create a bulletproof button component and pattern, or does it take me longer to just implement a button? And the question is always at a question of scale. How many times are you going to implement that button? How many times are you going to implement that card? If this pattern only exists in a couple of places, does it make sense for it to remain a bespoke pattern, or does it make sense to bring into the design system? And this leads to fundamental question number two. Will this ship to production? And if it doesn't ship directly to production, how close does it get? AI is a great exercise for us and a great theoretical thing, but it's a little bit gimmicky unless you can actually get the work that it produces into production. Now, of course, it doesn't have to necessarily be directly into production. You can have it be something that is like, hey, let me create a couple of different design directions. But if none of that work actually influences the design process or influences the way that we're creating the code, it's not actually really that useful. And it also can't just happen for one person. It has to happen for lots of people at scale. And so because we know that AI is going to require at least some human intervention to ship, there's an ongoing cost there that we need to be really aware of as designers, coders, product people, to understand that the implementation of AI isn't a cost-free way to just go build every product that we ever dreamed of. So with that, I wanted to revisit the polls real quick. We talked a lot about the source of truth for digital products, whether or not that lives in design and code. Most of you said design. A handful said code. The biggest thing to keep in mind with this is that truth is pretty variable. It moves around a lot, but ultimately it's about what users ultimately see that we're creating for. it turns out there's a lot of people that use design tokens, and they're pretty constrained in that set of design tokens. 1 to 50 was the big winner, with not that many people having more than 1,000. And then, most of you have a design system. Some of you have had a design system for a very long time, but about a third of you have never worked with a design system, or sorry, your company does not have a design system. And as such, like, there's a lot of room for these sort of systems concepts to still catch fire. And then most of you have at least used AI, if not using AI very frequently. And so we know that this sort of revolutionary idea of changing the way we work is in front of us. And now it's up to us to sort of understand how these tools are going to be a part of our product creation process. So thanks a lot for this talk. Really appreciate your time and attention. We do want to do some Q&A. Evan, do you have any final thoughts?
No, I'm just interested to dive into the Q&A. I've got it listed up right here. And, the top one, I'm going to go ahead and read out: ethical use of AI standards, and if there are resources for learning more about that. Our co-host, Lindsay, behind the scenes, is going to drop a couple links in the chat right now. But I pulled up one of the sites here, and I have Microsoft's principles. And I'm just going to read them real quick because I think some of these principles are really well thought out. This is a deep topic, so I'm just going to basically touch upon some high-level pieces, and there's some deeper reading here for you. So they say, for their principles of what's important: fairness, AI systems should treat all people fairly; reliability and safely, AI systems should perform reliably and safely; privacy and security, AI systems should be more secure and respect privacy; inclusiveness, all AI systems should empower everyone and engage people; transparency, AI systems should be understandable; and accountability, people should be accountable for AI systems. So, that's what's important. How that gets done, I think that's something that we are all collectively trying to be able to answer. And like I said, there's a few links that are dropped in for some further reading. The next one, what is the future of creating custom design assets? Oh, wait, sorry. Do you think we're close to a no-code design systems era where designs are automatically developed? So we believe in kind of more of a low-code one. And so what we mean by that is that we think that the building blocks are the components in a design system should be expertly crafted. So the button, the card, the hero, those should be, expertly designed and then expertly coded. And then once you have those building blocks, the assembly of them into the full experiences and the flows is not needed to be hand coded. And so that's our approach. That's what Knapsack does. It's one of the big features of our product. And we think that is kind of where it's at, because no code seems like it's revisiting Dreamweaver all over again. That's great for a very small 5-page site, but I don't think it really scales towards some of the higher needs that people are going for. Chris, do you want to tackle some of the next Q&A questions?
Yeah. So Samantha has one. Wait, there we go. What is the future of creating custom design assets using AI, which are not producible currently available solutions? I'm not sure I totally understand that question. I think that what that's asking is, can we create assets using AI which are of higher value? So things like is that like enterprise illustrations or like the design of a website, like a theme? I don't know, is there something in chat that can help me understand that more?
Yeah, Raul, if you want to just rephrase it and then drop it in chat, we'll try to keep an eye out for it, and then maybe we could dive a little bit deeper into that question for you. Chris, do you want to tackle the next Q&A question? I'll keep my eye out for Raul in the chat.
Yeah, thank you. What are your thoughts on design systems for websites and marketing, not just products? I think the design systems have a big prevalence across basically any digital experience. And so how we tend to think about design systems at Knapsack are design systems actually should largely own your digital representation of your brand. And that digital representation brand is largely a set of design tokens. And then the implementation of that is a bunch of component patterns that can be used across a wide variety of contexts. That can be a marketing website. That can be a native app. We have customers that use our system for email marketing, where you can actually have like componentized email. So there's broad applications. We tend to think about design systems as being pretty constrained to the digital space. And there's some very crazy use cases that are out there around like, what about hand scanners in a warehouse, or kiosks in an office, or, more broadly speaking, like living kitchen devices, like IoT things. Some of those things start to stretch our current understanding of design systems pretty far. Spotify actually has a bunch of great talks about how their design system influences the way that Spotify works on a smart refrigerator. That is an interesting sort of conversation. But I think that the scope shouldn't just be limited to the product side of that. There's a bunch of things that we can do in marketing that still have branding requirements, that still care about basic UI elements, that still care about the way that we construct those digital experiences. I would just try to say, like, if you're going to sit there and make a printed piece of collateral in a marketing organization, a design system is probably the long way to get there for that one. But maybe it could house where that logo asset or that color palette exists. There's another one. How can we leverage AI to automate accessibility testing, and not just the visual aspect of components, but also the functionality? So how do you use those components? I think a lot of this has to do with the feedback side of things, right? There's sort of two parts to the accessibility side of things, right? There's the standards conversation, which is ideally always evolving, and those standards are really focused on like things we can test for up front. So I can go feed this into an accessibility scanning tool, and it can tell me results. Then there's also a lot of like practical, like accessibility laboratory stuff where you have actual people using assistive technology that are going and experiencing that experience using their sort of standard way of approaching the web or a native app or some digital experience. Those tend to be a lot better than just standards, but it also tends to be really, really expensive. And then there's the whole emerging idea of like device detection and all this other stuff like that that's there that, yes, that's present, but it's also got a lot of complicating factors. And so getting really, really great accessibility is either like based in standards, which is broadly inadequate, or it's based in very expensive user-based testing that is focused on people that are actually with the need using the tool. Now, it's really difficult to get companies to really care enough to spend a lot of money to have all of that. And it's also very, very difficult to justify in a business case scenario. What the really cool thing about AI and design systems is going to be able to do is you're going to be able to have a scope of AI that looks at a lot of these different groups. Like, let's look at this experience through the lens of somebody that is non-neurotypical. And so maybe the idea of cognitive load is too much for this page. And so we should streamline down that page. There's lots of ways that we can use AI to sort of create these personas that is still not as good as the actual person, but is a definite step in the right direction. And then we can start to measure the value of those experiences and use AI to actually take aim at a lot of these more thorny accessibility problems. I think that ultimately in the future, there is that idea of like hyper personalization that I was talking about that is probably the better solve for this long term, but that's also a little bit further out. And so I definitely see a lot of companies that are going to be coming around in the near future. They're going to have a lot of these AI tools that help you test for accessibility. And then hopefully we're all working towards a future where you can determine your own form of accessibility for any experience in real time. Evan, you want to go back to you for a bit?
Yeah, I'd love to. Let's see here.
Oh, this is a good one for you. How specific?
How specific can we get when designing systems with AI? I think that it largely is going to boil down to what context the AI has. So this is back to my point about constraints and about garbage in, garbage out. You can get as specific as you want, but how well it interprets that is largely going to be based on its prior knowledge or the context. I think this is why like general artificial intelligence is one of the really hard things, and that is why having these different specialists in these different areas is likely the best way forward. So I hope I answered the question. How specific there? I think a lot of things are also going to get into the point around feedback about how well prior art worked. So somebody asked the AI to do something, it went to production. How well did it convert? And then that feedback. So again, it's like kind of the training of the model.
No, I mean, I think that's a really important point is like AI can get hyper specific if you give it a very clear goal and you give it enough iterations. And I think that that ability to like set the goal and to set an iteration time, that's what sort of defines how specific it can get.
What are our thoughts on generative AI and ownership of original content? So, not a tricky question. Well, that's the tough one right there, right? You know, uh, there's a quote somewhere around basically that nothing's new. You know that every humans have been in each other forever, and so there's something to be said about that here with AI as well. But there's also when that needle goes too far the other way, where an original artist can see the blatant reuse of their work. So that's bad. And I think that we can basically bookend it. So, like I said, on one end, if you're saying that you can clearly see original art somewhere, that's too far one way. Um, and then on the other side is basically everything off limits. I don't really think that's how the world could or should work. We're going to find out a lot over the next handful of years. And, unfortunately, you can't really close Pandora's box or put the genie back in the bottle. So best thing to do is just buckle up and be along for the ride. And again, like it's tough. Please see a lawyer for any
Yeah,
disputes.
there's a lot of really great conversations about this happening right now, and I think that I am not a lawyer. Personally, where I look at this, right, is the specific assets aside, like what AI is really valuable for is the systems, right? Like the fact that I can't, make a fake bot of a famous person and use their voice print, like that doesn't really bother me. That's a place that like litigation will figure that out eventually. But what is interesting is the idea of like, can we control the systems that are in place, right? And this has actually been a big debate inside of the tabletop role playing community for a while because during the pandemic, Wizards of the Coast, who owns Dungeons and Dragons, released a change to their rule set that said that they wanted to have more ownership of the game system itself, and the community sort of rebelled against that. It's very difficult to look at that ownership of that system as any more than a set of rules that are applied to dice. And that's something that isn't necessarily intellectual property. It shouldn't be free for all. Everybody should be able to use whatever system they want to be able to play a game in that case, or create a website in our case. It's the content that you use within that system that is something that is more interesting in intellectual property. And when we think about that in the context of something like Knapsack or the systems that we've been talking about, we're talking about companies taking advantage largely of their own data in new and interesting ways. And so the IP side of things being in a place more about the systems than the content itself. But there is like this really interesting content debate that is raging on. And I do want to acknowledge that. It's just, I'm not the smartest person on the planet legally to talk about that stuff.
So I'm going to skip just a little bit down the list because there's one that I think would be a good one to go out on. Do you think in the future AI will remove all our jobs, designers and developers? I think this is one that just coming up. And I heard someone say something that stuck with me on this, is that AI is not going to take your job. someone using AI will. So this isn't the first time that there's been a new tool. This isn't the first time that we've had an opportunity to become a little bit more efficient. And kind of like design systems, we think that you should stand on the shoulders of giants. And I think it clears the head for the more interesting work. If you, as a designer, are making a brand new page and you have to start with the buttons and the cards, that's where all your energy goes. But that has already been made. So you can start to spend your time on what is an elegant user experience, what is something that can like serve the user well towards their goal, and or maybe crafting the missing component that's already there. But it is about like not repeating yourself and standing on the shoulders of giants and learning how to use the tools at our disposal. So it's kind of the piece there. And just remember that AI is like a fantastic first draft, and we're still all like the curators and the creators here. Also want to say thanks for coming today. Hope everybody has a wonderful day. I know I've been enjoying sharing with you all.
Yeah, feel free to reach out if there are additional questions. You can reach us LinkedIn, Twitter, hello@knapsack.cloud. Thank you so much for listening to us. Been great. Have a great day, everyone.
All right. Thank you so much. That wraps up our deep dive into the future of digital production and AI and design systems with Knapsack. Thank you so much, Chris, and a wonderful presentation and discussion. We're going to send all the attendees an email by the end of the week, which is going to include a link to the recording of this session. And a huge thank you to all of you for coming. I hope you had a great time today.